Chapter 1 is we're going to explore childhood and delinquency. Uh, the overview, we're going to look at the history of childhood and development. We're also going to look at the creation and development of the juvenile justice system. We will examine the legal concepts of delinquency and what's called status offending. Hopefully, this will enable you to understand how the concept of adolescence evolved over time and how that evolution influenced the development of the juvenile court and the special status of delinquency. So this is kind of going to be an overview of what's to come for the rest of the semester. So the risks and rewards of adolescence. Oh, and since this is the first video lecture you're hopefully watching, if you're watching, it's awesome. My intention is not to kind of read you the book, but to kind of highlight points, maybe add some more examples. I do like to explore the New York laws in this area, so I'm going to be adding those to these lectures that wouldn't necessarily be in the book. And I also really enjoyed the PowerPoints that came along with the book material. So since I can't see you guys in a classroom where we'd have further discussions, I would like you to at least have these PowerPoints. So I'm going to use them because they put the points nicely and condensed, so you can print these out and use them as supplemental materials. So without further ado, there are 75 million children in this country under the age of 17. That's the number we are going to use, or the age bracket that we're going to use in the United States. And that makes up 24% of the population. And sadly, 10 million of these young folks are at-risk youths. We'll define that definition in a little bit. So what are the problems? We have this wealthy country. We're one of the wealthiest countries. But, our teens face a number of problems, including social, personal, educational, financial issues, problems. What are the biggest areas that would affect overall children? Poverty, inadequate health care, separation or divorce when the parents separate or divorce, foster care, inadequate educational attainment, dropping out of school early. They're subject to abuse or neglect by the people who required to care for them, whether that's parents or a guardian, named guardian, and just dealing with coping with the modern world. So let's talk about these things specifically. Child poverty. Poverty in the U.S. is more prevalent than it has ever been in the last 30, 40 years. And I've been around that long. And I've seen a lot of changes, especially in, the American family makeup. And I've worked in the family courts here in New York. I've represented children. I've represented parents. Child poverty exists, and it takes a toll. And it affects not just children. I mean, I'm going to talk generally real quick. All of these, ages, genders, race, ethnicity, faced with poverty. And the reality is it's the severest among young people under the age of 30. The federal poverty level, you can Google it and look it up. It's completely unrealistic, and it rarely ticks up. And this poverty level is something that's determined and used through, in the court system to determine a whole number of things. And what that poverty level is $24,000 a year for a family of four, not just one person, a family of four has to live on $24,000. That's what the federal government has defined our poverty line, if you're below that number in a family of 4. That's a little hard when a 2-bedroom apartment, if you have a family of 4, you need at least 2 bedrooms, can cost anywhere between $1,000 and $1,500 a month, just the rent alone. Nearly 7 million children live in extreme poverty, which means their families live on less than $12,000 a year for a family of 4. And 45% of American children are considered living in low-income families. That's a very big number. And no surprise that this affects minority children more than white children. They tend to live in poverty more. And living in poverty has a lifelong effect on children, including their cognitive achievements and skills, the educational attainment, nutrition, physical and mental health issues, social behavior. They tend to lag behind. They're less likely to graduate from high school, and the chances of them obtaining a bachelor degree by the time they're in their mid-20s is almost nil. It's close to 0. So child poverty is a big issue. Health problems. Receiving adequate health care is a concern for American children. In some cases, it's a lack of actually having insurance, but most states now have passed laws that require health care for all children, that they be covered, and it's usually at the expense of the state. And that's the case in New York. All children have the ability to have health coverage. But the other thing is lack of physical exercise, physical activity. They spend more time in front of TV. There's no adequate recreation places available near their house, like a rec center or a park. So health problems. Divorce. Parents separate. This, homes when parents are going through a divorce or separation, the home wrecked with conflict and tension, and then the absence of one parent or both parents, or a full split divorce, and having to go through that court proceeding. You see the rates right on the screen. They estimate that 40 to 50% of first marriages in the U.S. end in divorce, and the second is even higher, and then the third is even, I guess, 3 times the charm. I don't know, but it certainly takes its toll on children. The foster care system. I'm not overly excited about how the book interprets the foster care system. I'll probably expand a little bit more here. But kids are placed in foster care, and it suggests that it's based on divorce or separation or breakups. That's not generally the case. If parents divorce, there's usually some arrangement, a shared custody arrangement, where maybe the children live in primary care with one parent and then see the other parent, or vice versa. There are sometimes children go live with grandparents. It's usually for some other reason than just divorce or breakup or separation. And then the foster care system is a state, and then we're going to talk about it in more detail, but generally right here is a state governmental system, usually run by a Department of Social Services, and children go into foster care under a state mandate as if there's been some sort of neglect or abuse. Certainly kids can be placed in foster care. Usually it's called guardianship care if a child is going to be living with a family member, aunt, uncle, grandparent. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but for various reasons, let's just use various reasons, children are placed and raised by other people who are not their parents, right? And they enter the foster care system. That's when the state it takes responsibility for caring for the children, usually by placing them in qualified homes. But children in foster care, especially if they enter foster care at an early age, a very young age, 3, 4, 5, and are raised through the foster care system, they actually are required to leave at 18. Like once you're 18, boom, you're on your own. And there's usually no support available, and it can cause some long-term risks, certainly physical, mental health issues. So the foster care system plays a role. Inadequate education. About 60% of junior high students don't read adequately. 500,000 students drop out of school every year. And sadly, you grow up and you don't have a high school education. Adults who do not have their high school education earn 30% less than those who did. And getting a high school education is the single most effective preventative strategy against adult poverty. So adequate education should be number one and on the radar. But educational problems do hit, and they hit the poor and minority children the hardest. And why? Why? Why is that? Education's available to everybody. Public education. Because they tend to go to the poorest schools. Not all schools have the same amount of money to use, depending on where they are. But they tend to go to the poorest schools and have the minimum educational opportunities and not a whole lot of achievement opportunities. So inadequate education plays a role. Child abuse and neglect. We'll use this for a definition as of now. We may expand on it or when we talk about the court system. Any act or failure to act by a parent or caregiver who is responsible for the children's welfare. So this is, on the caregiver, not necessarily the child acting here. It's the behavior of the caregiver. This can be any number of things, by the way. Any act or failure to act, and that's a very broad terminology. Leaving a young child home alone. So let's say, for example, a baby in a crib while the only parent, or both the parents go out to the bar across the street to hang out with their friends and have some drinks. A parent who overdoses on drugs in front of the child. And then the child runs to the neighbor for help. And that child's only 6 years old. Corporal punishment. Sex abuse. All of those, there's a whole number of things. Those examples I give you, because those are 100% examples cases that I've been involved in, where I've either represented the child or the parent. So those are some examples, and there's tons more. And as you can see, close to 1 million children are legally abused each year. Social media plays a role. These things didn't exist 20 years ago. Social media, the internet did. But it was just really the early 90s, the internet starts coming along. But social media, not like we have social media today. So these add extra pressures. Not only are kids at risk of real-time bullying, but they can be subject to bullying in cyberspace. And this is from people they hardly know, right? Whose identity they may never know. And there's a number of stories in the book of children who are subject to this kind of bullying, then commit suicide. Cyberbullying. There's a kind of differences between cyberbullying, cyberstalking, sexting. These all are new types of laws and issues that children are dealing with. Cyberbullying, the willful and repeated harm inflicted through the medium of electronic text. So this is not a crime, by the way. Someone who conducts cyberbullying and the other person does something drastic like kills themselves as a result, the person who's done the cyberbullying is not subject to criminal charges. While a number of students have tried, including the state of New York, to pass those kind of laws, the high courts of the states have deemed those statutes unconstitutional because they violate free speech. I don't know how we get around that, but aside from the examples in the books are two examples, there are a ton of examples. There's been a case where a adult woman pretended to be a boy teenager and was harassing and doing cyberbullying to another young lady, and this mother who created this internet, I think it was a MySpace page, to do this. Her daughter was on the cheerleading team with the girl who they were harassing. They were trying to get her to not participate in cheerleading. It was that woman, they arrested her, but I think her cases were dropped. I think that was one of the very first ones that kind of got media attention and a national look at this cyberbullying. Cyberstalking. That's the use of the internet, email, or other electronic communication devices to stalk another person. And this not only involves, teenagers to teenagers. This is what predators, child predators, adults do. They seek, are used to seek and prey on, kids. This one, cyberstalking, is a big issue, and it is a crime if it's an adult. Actually, it's a crime, period. It's a form of stalking. But it's elevated to a higher crime if it's an adult targeting children. And sexting, that is sending sexual explicit photos, images, or text messages or emails via a cell phone or other mobile device. Sexting is a crime, and it exists as a crime between teenagers. We're going to talk about this, young people, but it actually distinguishes the age group that's sexting. So adults can totally exchange explicit photos, images, and texts amongst each other. Teens, no can do, and certainly not an adult to an underage person. Sexting is a crime. The book seems to suggest that sexting is on the decline, or maybe it wasn't possibly as common as people thought it was. In my view, it's only my personal opinion, is that may have been the case where sexting was popular at one point, and it's sharply declining because of the passage of laws making sexting illegal, would be my guess of why it does not occur anymore. But also, I think young people are very savvy to the world of social media, and if you send, and I think everyone is very well aware, if you send a photo, any type of photo of yourself, to somebody else, the chances of it getting on social media are great. So maybe a lot of folks are going, yeah, maybe that's not a smart idea. So, social media and the internet. Do you think there's any hope? Any hope for these types of conditions? These social conditions, they have a huge impact on children. Well, I will say, not all has lost. It all sounds daunting. We're certainly going to explore a lot of these in more detail, but there is some significant data that shows that several areas are on the decline. including teenage pregnancy. Abortion rates have fallen relative to teens. More kids are going to college. Math and reading scores are increasing between grades 4 and 12. I'd like to see some more numbers, but the numbers are significantly less with regards to teenage drinking and smoking. I haven't seen anything relative to drug use, though. But not all is lost. We'll get to more details. Oh, I didn't switch my screen on when I was talking about cyber stalking and sexting, and there's a Ryan case regarding Ryan and what happened. I'll let you read about that one in the book. Juvenile delinquency. If we're going to talk about it, we kind of have to know a little bit about what it is, but we're really going to be delving into the juvenile system as we move forward. And we are going to define it as criminal behavior engaged in by minors. And the state that we're dealing with will define the age of what is deemed a minor. So in New York, between the ages of 7 and 18, or let's say 7 and your 19th birthday, so the whole while you're 18, up until your 19th birthday, you're considered a minor, okay? And I have a link. I'm going to mention this a few times during this Chapter 1 lecture. There is a link to the New York Court website regarding crimes by children. You can get an overview of the age breakdown. New York went through some recent changes in their laws, raised the age, because in New York, once you were 16 and you committed a crime, you were treated like an adult. So that changed in 2017, and now they have a different title. We'll talk about it more, but I want you, as we go through this chapter, but one of the assignments is to link yourself into that one page and read about the age breakdowns for juveniles in New York State. And 7 seems to be the magic number of where we start things. Children under the age of 7 do not have the ability to have the mental capacity to engage in criminal behavior. So, to continue on with our overview, juvenile delinquency, 1.7 million youths are arrested every year. That means under the age of 18. And while most crimes are minor stuff, petty theft, small drug possession in New York, that would have been marijuana possession, but we've made that illegal for small amounts of marijuana. Damage to property. That seems to be some of the reoccurring ones, but there are minors who commit serious felonies. Think about gangs. Urban areas, they recruit nice and early, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and they commit serious felonies, murder. And if a youth is involved with multiple serious criminal acts, they're considered a repeat offender, and they give them a name, a chronic juvenile offender. And these are folks who are arrested 4 or more times during the age of 7 and 18. And it is believed that once they reach this point, there's no turning back. They'll continue into adulthood and for the rest of their life in committing crimes. And I have represented lots of individuals that sadly began their criminal careers at their youth age. And I've sat with them. I remember meeting them for the first time when they were 16, and it would be something very minor. And then they say, I learned my lesson, Miss Fox, never going to happen again. That's great. Next time I see them, they might be 17, and I go, what happened to never doing this again? I know, I'm sorry, it's never going to happen again. And it would be a slightly higher charge. And then the next year, it's a slightly higher charge. And now I have represented, one individual, 6 or 7 times and has gone to prison twice. And he's under the age of 25. And I see that a lot. And chronic juvenile offenders. But it's how are we going to, we're going to talk about it, how are we going to handle it? The cost to society for these cases, nearly $2 million a year. So how are we going to combat it? We are going to try and talk about how can we keep juveniles from becoming chronic offenders. So combating this type of delinquency, we're going to have to think about psychological problems, social conditions, dysfunctional homes. Is it more of an urban problem than a suburban problem? The case I just told you about happened in northern New York. And that's not unique. I've had several folks, unfortunately. I've had someone that I represented in family court when his parents are going through a divorce. I was his attorney for the child during divorce, and he was 14, and he was getting kicked out of school. And I'm still representing him today. He's 18, 19 years old in various things. These things have an effect on children. Poverty, peers, substance abuse. We're also going to need to analyze the juvenile justice system, which is very familiar, very like if you have taken Introduction to Criminal Law, or maybe you're taking it now. Juvenile justice system looks just like the criminal justice system. We have cops and we have courts and we have corrections in some form. We're going to have to deal with those dealing with juveniles. How should police handle the minors? Do the children have legal rights? Are there any differences for correctional programs, reform or some other assistance for children rather than incarcerating them with adults? So should the juvenile justice system be concerned with long-term effects of any sort of punishment, not just incarceration, on minors? And could a chronic offender ever be rehabilitated? So these are just some of the questions we're going to go through in this course. But first we need to look at the development of childhood, or the concept of childhood, and then we'll see and discuss how a system of justice was developed to treat and care for these at-risk youths.